The day after I was fired, my neighbor's 5-year-old daughter made one phone call. By the next morning, the billionaire living next door had fired every person who allowed it to happen. My name is Ethan Parker. I'm 34 years old, and for 6 years, I worked as an operations manager at a regional shipping company. I was always the first person to arrive and usually the last one to leave. Then, one Tuesday morning, I was escorted out of my own office like a criminal for something I hadn't done. But the little girl next door saw me crying through my kitchen window. Her name was Lily. She was 5 years old, with dark curls, bright green overalls, and a plastic walkie-talkie clipped to her pocket. She didn't understand what being fired meant. She didn't know that her mother, Madeline Hayes, was a widowed billionaire who had built one of the country's fastest-growing logistics technology companies from her garage. And she certainly didn't know that Madeline's company controlled nearly 40% of the contracts held by the company that had just thrown me out. Lily only knew one thing. Her, Captain Ethan, was stuck, just like her toy sailboat had once been stuck in a storm drain. So she made a call she was never supposed to make. And that single call, from a child too young to understand office politics, corporate contracts, or fraud, was about to expose an entire chain of people who believed no one was watching. So why would a billionaire fire several executives over the termination of one ordinary employee? What did Lily say that made her mother freeze at the kitchen table? And why had I spent 2 years being too afraid to knock on the door of the woman who was about to change my life? It all began at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning. I remember the exact time because I was looking at the clock when Derek Lawson appeared in my office doorway. "Ethan," he said, "they need you in the executive conference room." He wouldn't look me in the eye. That was the first sign that something was wrong. I followed him down the hallway, passing desks I had walked by every day for 6 years. Someone had a radio playing quietly. There was a box of donuts near the break room. A few employees were laughing about something on a computer screen. It looked like a completely normal Tuesday. Then I opened the conference room door. 2 people from Human Resources were sitting on one side of the table. A folder had been placed between them. And in that moment, I knew. It was the same feeling you get when you're walking down a staircase in the dark and expect another step that isn't there. My whole life was about to drop out from under me. "Have a seat, Ethan," the HR director said. I remained standing. "What is this about?" She opened the folder and slid a document across the table. My name was printed at the top. My employee login was attached to it. And at the bottom was what appeared to be my authorization. Except it wasn't my signature. It was only my name typed beneath a fraudulent expense report tied to a client account I had never handled. "These numbers were falsified," she said. "The funds were routed to an outside transportation vendor. The report was submitted using your login and authorization." The room became painfully quiet. I could hear the air conditioner humming above us. I could hear my own heartbeat. "I don't have access to this account," I said. My voice sounded surprisingly steady, even though everything inside me was collapsing. "I have never had access to it. Check the system permissions. Check the timestamps. I wasn't even in the building when this was submitted." The HR director closed the folder. "We've made our decision." 4 words. 6 years of loyalty reduced to 4 words. I want you to understand something. Anger wasn't the first thing I felt. At first, I was simply confused. It was like listening to someone speak a language you almost understood but couldn't quite follow. I kept waiting for someone to ask me a question. Where had I been that night? Did I recognize the vendor? Had I ever approved a report like this before? Did I have anything to say in my defense? But no one asked. That was the part that broke me. It wasn't only that I had been fired. It was that I had been erased without a single person looking at me and asking, "Ethan, what happened?" They gave me a cardboard box. Then they stood there while I filled it. A coffee mug with a cracked handle. A framed photograph of my late father. A youth baseball schedule I had taped inside my desk drawer. Then 2 security employees, men I had shared elevators and lunch tables with for years, walked beside me through the entire office. We passed the break room. We passed the box of donuts. We passed 12 people who suddenly found their computer screens incredibly interesting. No one said goodbye. No one said it looked wrong. No one asked what had happened. They watched someone they had called a friend at holiday parties being escorted out like a thief. I made it to my car before my hands started shaking. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes because I didn't trust myself to drive. And the worst thought circling through my head wasn't, how could they do this? It was, how am I going to pay my bills? Then another thought followed. One sentence that could appear on every future background check and job application. Terminated for financial misconduct. Guilty without an investigation. Guilty without a hearing. Guilty without anyone asking a single question. I drove home to my small gray house on a quiet cul-de-sac. I carried the cardboard box inside and placed it on the kitchen counter. The house was so silent that I could hear the refrigerator running. I'm not someone who cries easily. My father raised me to believe that men were supposed to keep moving, no matter how badly something hurt. But that evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table while the light outside changed from gold to orange and then to gray. I lowered my head into my hands. And for the first time since I was a child, I let myself cry. I didn't realize the kitchen window was open. And I didn't know that next door, inside a house twice the size of mine, a 5-year-old girl wearing star-covered pajamas was standing at her own window with a glass of milk. She was watching the men who had taught her how to ride a bicycle sit with his head in his hands, as though the whole world had suddenly become too heavy for him to carry. Lily had a plastic walkie-talkie clipped to her pajamas. Its matching radio was sitting forgotten in my junk drawer. The battery was somehow still alive after nearly 8 months. I had given the radios to her as a joke after the day I climbed into a storm drain to rescue her toy sailboat. If your boat ever gets stuck again, I had told her, radio the captain. I had completely forgotten about it. Lily had not. The first thing I heard was a burst of static. It came from the kitchen drawer I hadn't opened in months. I lifted my head. Then, through a cheap plastic radio and one remarkably stubborn battery, I heard a small, serious voice. Captain Ethan, this is Lily. Do you copy? Your boat is stuck. Over. I sat there in the dark, holding that little radio in my hand. And I swear, her tiny voice did something 6 years of hard work had failed to do. It reminded me that someone in the world could still see me. Before I continue, take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications. Stories like this can disappear from your feed before you ever get the chance to hear how they end. All right. Back to the kitchen. I pressed the button on the radio. My thumb was trembling. Lily, I said, it's a little late for a radio check, sailor. Mommy says you're sad, she answered, ignoring every rule of radio communication. Are you stuck like my boat was? I couldn't lie to her. You can lie to human resources. You can lie to yourself while sitting in a parking lot for 20 minutes. But you can't lie to a 5-year-old who is asking whether you're stuck. Yeah, kiddo, I whispered. I think I am. There was a rustling sound on the other end. Then I heard someone gently take the radio from her. A moment later, another voice came through. Warm. Quiet. Careful. It was the voice of the woman I had been too afraid to approach for 2 years. Ethan, it's Madeline. I'm sorry. Are you all right? Let me tell you about Madeline Hayes. 2 years earlier, a moving truck had pulled into the driveway next door. Madeline stepped out carrying a sleeping toddler on one hip and a laptop bag over the opposite shoulder. I remember thinking she looked tired in the deep, permanent way only a single parent can look tired. At the time, I didn't know she had built a logistics software empire from her garage. I didn't know her husband had died in an accident 3 years earlier. I didn't know she regularly flew across the country for business while Lily stayed home with a nanny. I only knew she was my new neighbor. That first weekend, I repaired a loose step on her front porch. Not because she asked me to. It simply needed fixing. Over the next 2 years, I replaced her porch light, carried her trash cans back during windy weather, and taught Lily how to ride a bicycle in my driveway. Madeline would sit on the front steps, watching us while the coffee in her hands went cold. Some evenings, she and I talked until the sky became dark. We talked about small things. Then about important things. Sometimes about nothing at all. Every time I walked back to my own house, I felt lighter than I had all day. And every time, I told myself the same lie. A woman like that is out of reach for a man like you. Don't embarrass yourself. So I never asked her out. For 2 years, I never once found the courage. Now she was speaking to me through a toy radio, asking whether I was okay. I almost told her I was fine. But it had been the worst day of my life, and her voice was the first kindness I had heard all day. I was fired today, I said. They accused me of falsifying expense reports. I didn't do it, Madeline. I don't even have access to the account they mentioned. But no one asked me anything. They just made their decision and walked me out. The radio went silent. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind of silence that tells you someone is leaning closer and listening to every word. Ethan, she finally said, come over. Bring every document they gave you. I want to hear the whole story. That night, I sat on her back porch beneath the light fixture I had repaired with my own hands. I told her everything. The conference room. The signature that wasn't mine. Derek Lawson standing in my doorway, unable to meet my eyes. The 12 employees who watched me carry a cardboard box through the office and said nothing. Madeline listened without interrupting me once. When I finished, she remained completely still for several seconds. Then she asked the question that changed everything. Ethan, what is the name of your company? Fairmont Regional Logistics. She went quiet again. This time, I felt the change in the air. Ethan, she said slowly, Fairmont is one of my company's largest regional transportation partners. We route almost 40% of our regional shipments through them. I stared at her. I didn't know that. I swear. I know you didn't. Something in her expression changed. The exhausted softness disappeared. In its place was something sharp, disciplined, and completely focused. For the first time, I understood how this woman had built a billion-dollar company from a garage. I built my company around one rule, she said. Verify everything before you trust it. And somehow, for 2 years, I never looked closely at the company where my own next-door neighbor worked. She looked directly at me. Send me everything tomorrow morning. Every email you still have. Every login record. Every timestamp. I want to see the evidence myself. I barely slept that night. At sunrise, I sent her every file I could access. By 10 o'clock that morning, my phone rang. Ethan. Madeline said. Her voice sounded different. Quiet, controlled, and tightly wound. It was the voice of someone staring directly at proof. The expense report that got you fired was submitted at 9:47 on a Thursday night using your login. I told you. I was at my nephew's baseball game. I know, she said. Your company's fleet application was still tracking your vehicle. At exactly 9:47, it placed you 40 minutes away from the office. She paused. Ethan, you didn't submit that report. Someone accessed your account remotely. My knees weakened. And I think I know who did it, she continued. I've been reviewing the vendor records all morning. There is a pattern going back at least 18 months. Someone has been diverting money through an outside trucking company. I gripped the phone more tightly. And when the auditors started getting close, she said, they needed someone to blame. Quickly. My mouth went dry. Who owns the trucking company? There was another silence. Then I heard Madeline take a sharp breath. She had gone completely still at her own kitchen table. It was the kind of stillness that comes when a lie finally reveals its entire shape. You're not going to believe whose name is connected to it, she said. Who? Derek Lawson. The man who had appeared in my doorway that morning and couldn't look me in the eye. The outside trucking company receiving the stolen money was legally owned by his brother-in-law. I lowered myself onto the kitchen floor as the entire scheme clicked into place. 18 months earlier, Derek had come to me and asked to use my login for what he described as a one-time systems update. I had agreed. That was the kind of person I was. The person who said yes. The person who fixed a neighbor's porch light. The person who climbed into a storm drain to save a child's toy boat. Derek had saved my credentials. He had used my trust like a key to a door he intended to rob. Then, when the auditors got close, he used that same key to push me through the door and leave me there to take the blame. 6 years of my life had been sacrificed to protect a man who couldn't even look me in the eye. But here is the thing about framing an innocent person. It only works when no one with enough power is paying attention. Derek Lawson had made one mistake he never could have predicted. He had framed the man who lived next door to the billionaire whose company represented nearly 40% of Fairmont Regional Logistics business. Madeline didn't contact Fairmont as my neighbor. She called the owner directly as his largest regional client. And she asked him one question. Why was an innocent employee escorted out like a criminal before anyone checked a single access log? By Friday afternoon, Derek Lawson was gone. He had been terminated and referred to investigators for criminal prosecution. But Madeline didn't stop there. She kept asking the question everyone else had avoided. Who else knew? One by one, the answers came. The senior manager who rushed my termination because he wanted the issue removed from his quarterly reports. The head of human resources who approved the decision without reviewing a single system record. 2 supervisors who had noticed suspicious transactions for months but remained silent because speaking up felt risky. 5 people in total. 5 adults who had chosen comfort, reputation, and self-protection over the truth. All 5 were removed from the company within a week. And it happened because a 5-year-old girl picked up a plastic walkie-talkie and radioed the captain. On Monday evening, someone knocked on my front door. Madeline stood on the porch with Lily beside her and an envelope in her hand. The porch light I had repaired glowed warmly above them. Official apology, Madeline said, holding out the envelope. Full back pay, compensation, and written confirmation that your employment record has been cleared. I took the envelope. But that isn't the main reason I came, she continued. She took a breath. For the first time since I had known her, the confident woman who had built a corporate empire looked nervous. I'm restructuring the way my company manages outside vendors, she said. I need someone who checks the facts instead of blindly trusting a signature. Someone who understands operations, but who also knows the value of honesty. She held my gaze. I want that person to be you. I stared at her. Director of Vendor Operations, she said. You would report directly to me. I looked down at the envelope, then back at Madeline. At the woman whose door I had wanted to knock on for 2 years. The woman I had convinced myself was beyond my reach. Madeline, I don't know what to say. Say yes. Then her voice became quieter. Lily was tugging gently at her sleeve. And maybe say yes to dinner, too, Madeline added. Just the 2 of us this time. I've been too afraid to ask you for about 2 years. I laughed. A real laugh. The first one I had managed in days. That's funny, I said. I've been afraid to ask you the same thing for exactly that long. Lily stood between us with the walkie-talkie still clipped to her overalls. She seemed completely unconcerned by the fact that she had helped expose 5 grown adults. She looked up and proudly announced, I fixed the boat. You really did, sailor, I told her. My voice cracked. You really did. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever been the person who fixes everyone else's porch light? The person who always says yes? The one who shows up whenever someone needs help, while quietly wondering whether anyone would ever show up for you? For 34 years, I believed the answer was no. Then a little girl with a plastic radio proved me wrong. 6 months later, I was standing in Madeline's kitchen on a Sunday morning, making pancakes. Lily was pushing her plastic sailboat across the floor during what she described as an extremely important rescue mission. Madeline leaned against the counter, watching us with an expression I had waited 2 years to see. I had accepted the job. I had also accepted her invitation to dinner. Then a second dinner. Then many more after that. By spring, I had nearly stopped referring to my own house as anything except next door. Most nights, I wasn't sleeping there anyway. That Sunday morning, before the pancakes were finished, I got down on one knee in the middle of the kitchen. There was no expensive restaurant. No audience. No carefully prepared speech. There were only the 3 of us, and a batch of pancakes beginning to burn on the stove. Lily stared at me kneeling on the floor. Then, with complete seriousness, she asked, "Does this mean Captain Ethan lives here now?" Madeline laughed so hard that tears filled her eyes before she even managed to say yes. I learned something that year that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I had spent so long believing that people like Madeline were out of reach for people like me that I never noticed she had been standing on her porch every evening, waiting for me to be brave. Madeline learned that the person most worthy of trust is not always the one with the most impressive title. Sometimes, it's the person who repairs your porch light without asking for anything in return, simply because it is the right thing to do. And Lily learned the simplest and truest lesson of all. When someone you love is stuck, you don't wait for an adult to notice. You radio the captain. If this story moved you, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. That support is what allows us to keep sharing stories like Ethan and Lily's. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Ethan's position? And do you think that little walkie-talkie deserved a permanent place on the family mantle? Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next story.